I am encouraged. Appreciate the introduction, Cliff. I was expecting you maybe to talk me up a little bit there, and then I was going to come up here and make sure everybody lowered their expectations a little bit. And I'm grateful to be here. And it reminded me, actually, Daryl texted me quite a while back asking if I would be willing to come speak as we kick off VBS, or you all kick off your week of VBS. And it reminded me of a story that is always near and dear to me, because my father, who's actually preaching, Greg Hafer, I grew up, my father was a minister. He's a very gifted speaker, and he's actually preaching at another church close by here this morning right now. And I remember a story that he was telling me that, my grandfather was coming to hear him speak for maybe one of the first times or something in that nature, and my dad was really excited. He was thinking, okay, my hero, my father's coming to listen to me speak, and so I'm anxious. And he was talking to his father before he was getting ready to go up, or before the service started, and he said, Dad, I'm just really glad you're here. And my grandpa, and his infinite wit and wisdom, said, Greg, I'm just thankful to be here. I'm excited to hear you speak. But remember, son, nobody ever heard a bad, short sermon. And so I'm going to try to use my grandfather's wisdom today. I promise I will try to be brief no matter how long it takes. And with that being said, I am really excited today to be here, and especially to kick off this week of VBS when the focus is on running the race for His reward. And when I think of that, I think, as maybe you can read a little bit about me, or you've heard, and Daryl's wearing a jersey that is extraordinarily old, but I have grown up, and a lot of my life was surrounded by athletics. And the part of athletics that I loved was always looking at those that were great at what they did. And when you look at those athletes, you look at whether you're a fan of them or you're not a fan of them. You look at people like Michael Jordan or Tom Brady, and you hear the stories of how competitive they were, the preparation that went in to them making sure that they could achieve their optimal performance. I look at my own 3 children, and I've been blessed with three children, my wife and I, and all 3 of our children have been gifted athletically. My oldest son plays basketball at Columbia College in Columbia, Missouri. He's getting ready to go into his senior year. My daughter is going into her sophomore year at Northeastern Oklahoma A&M, playing basketball there. And my youngest son, who will be a senior this year, is a gifted basketball and football player, and he has already committed to go to Mizzou to play football following his senior year. And I tell you that to tell you this: when we look at these athletes and we look at them, and I look at their training, and I look at back when I used to do all the things I used to do to get ready to play, we realize, we regiment, we sacrifice, we do all these different things so that we can prepare ourselves to compete at the optimal level. Serious athlete does not do what they do in their training so they can get by. They do more than what is necessary so they can reach that maximum performance. And so this morning, we're going to spend our time in 1 Corinthians 9, verse 24. We're going to go through 27. We're also going to be in Hebrews a little bit. If you have a Bible with you or your app, you can begin to get that out. And before we do that, I'd just like to say a quick prayer, and then we'll jump in. Lord, this morning I thank you for the opportunity we have to come together, Lord. I thank you that you allow us weekly, daily, Lord, to lean into you, to see how you can help us prepare to attack this race of faith, this race of life, in a way such that we can honor you, glorify you, and receive the prize. We ask this morning that you open our hearts and minds, that we will be convicted this morning to continue to run that race and run it well. In your name, amen. So in 1 Corinthians 9, 24 through 27, Paul writes, "Do you not know that in a race all the runners run, but only one gets the prize? Run in such a way as to get the prize. Everyone who competes in the games goes into strict training. They do it to get a crown that will not last, but we do it to get a crown that will last forever. Therefore, I do not run like someone running aimlessly. I do not fight like a boxer beating the air. No, I strike a blow to my body and make it my slave, so that after I have preached to others, I myself will not be disqualified for the prize. You see, Paul uses the metaphor of athletics to challenge us in how to live a life as followers of Christ. And the reason he does this, you have to understand the context of 1 Corinthians. He's actually speaking to the church in Corinth, and he is trying to relate to them and motivate them to run in such a way that they will receive the prize. He wants to motivate them to live out their Christian faith. And he's doing this with people that are extraordinarily familiar with competition and athletics. All right, at this time, the people of Corinth would have been very familiar with the Olympic Games in Greece. In fact, in Corinth, they had their own games, the Isthmian Games, that took place every 2 years, just outside of Corinth. They would compete in these games to receive a crown that was like a massive wreath that displayed who the victors were, and even if they were victorious, they may get a statue. They were very familiar with athletics, and competition had been around a long time. So Paul uses that and tries to draw comparisons between sport and life, between sport and Christian life. And I would implore you to take this approach, that the Christian life can also be viewed as a competitive sport. And Paul in Corinthians was very honest about how hard it is competing and running the race of your faith so you can receive that reward. So today what I would like to do is just go through about 4 different keys that I've identified in my life of how you run that race to receive His reward. And throughout those 4 keys, I'm going to give you a couple of little bullet points within there that I believe I found in my life to be absolutely necessary to run the race and run it well. So, the first is this. The first key to running a race for His reward is you got to get in the game. You got to get in. You have to start somewhere. We often think that our faith is a spectator sport. It is not. You have to participate in your faith. All right? Often we think accepting Christ and saying yes, we've done enough. That's the beginning. Saying yes is not enough. As Christians in life, we often get to those starting blocks. How many of you have committed your life? You've said yes, you've been baptized, you're in the starting blocks, and then you never move. There's more than just saying yes. You know, I can use this example. Every team I ever played on, I wanted to be a starter. I used to watch videos. Daryl and I were talking before, and he's telling my son, I used to go to your house, and Daryl lived with us for a while, for crying out loud. I mean, it was amazing. But Daryl saw me and my brothers watch Michael Jordan's Come Fly With Me about 1 million times. And we would go out in the driveway, and we would emulate everything we saw. But if in that moment that I saw Michael Jordan and I was inspired to become, I wanted to work and I wanted to become a great basketball player, and I said, yes, that's what I want. Give me a basketball. And then I got that basketball, and I never went out in the driveway. I never went to the gym, and I never worked on it. It's not enough. You know, we used to tell my team all the time, if you want to get good at basketball, you better get a basketball in your hand. You better treat her like your girlfriend. If you want her to like you, you better spend some time with her. Right? If we don't spend time after we say yes, when we say yes, that's the beginning of the relationship. It's not the finish. We have to do more than say yes, or the relationship doesn't exist. So we see that a lot as Christians, don't we? I would argue one of the hardest parts of being a new Christian or a Christian is the survival of your faith when you come down from that spiritual high. You know, my son, Whit, who's with me here today, just got back yesterday from a week at CIY. And does everybody remember going to a camp, going to a conference, being in a worship service where you are feeling full? And you're like, yes, Lord, I am going to start running this race. But then we find ourselves not actually starting. We say yes, but we don't start. Hey, great example. You know, New Year's resolutions, right? Yep, this is what I'm going to do. 2 weeks later, I'll do that again next year. We'll try again later. That's what we are. And what happens is that high wears off. We slowly fall back into the old easy ways. We head back to the sidelines and spectate. And then we're great at saying yes and getting ready to start, but we never get out of the blocks and get in the race. We never get off the sideline and get in the game and stay in the game. And that's the same thing that happens in our faith race. As life begins to take us towards desires that provide temporary fulfillment, we go through the motions without really getting in the game. Then when life hits us, we love to dust off that faith like it's an accessory that we can add when we need it. We dust that faith off and say, all right, Lord, if you will take care of this for me, then I will start leaning into you. Faith becomes like that accessory instead of a focal point, and we place conditions on it. Lord, do this, and then I will. Instead of getting in the game. When we place that condition on the Lord, let me tell you, church, it's there's little value in just getting to the starting blocks. There's little value of just getting in the game. You have to finish. You have to start. You have to do more than just say yes. It's kind of like this. You can view it this way. When we are struggling and trying to figure out how to get in the race, how many of you been to, let's just call it a basketball game, a football game? How many in here, by show of hands, loves referees and believe there's a place in heaven for them? Daryl, referees. There is a place in heaven for you, but thank God we have a gracious God, Daryl. But one of the things you see when you feel like a referee is not focused, or a player, maybe you're watching your child or somebody else in a game and they make a silly mistake. What do we often yell? Get in the game. Get your head in the game. That's honestly what Jesus is constantly screaming at us. Get in the game. He wants us to hear that voice. Get in the game. And He wants us to respond to it. And the good news is this. He's constantly yelling it. He's constantly pursuing you. He's consecrated you. He's set you apart. He's sanctified you so that you know that your life is no longer about you. It's about a stubborn, living faith that allows you to run in such a way as to receive the prize, just like Paul tells us in verse 24. Paul is telling us we can't settle anymore to watch from the sidelines. We have to be an active participant in our own faith and our own growth. We have to change our attitude and we have to change our mindset. Moving towards Christ, even when we feel like giving up, we have to do more than just say yes. It's pretty easy, right? Just change your mind. Just change your mind. No, it's not easy. That takes more. So that leads us to our second key. You got to get in the race. But when you're in the race, preparation, you have to prepare. Preparation doesn't just happen before you get in the race. It happens while you're in the race, and it's a continual effort. In verse 25, Paul tells us this: everyone who competes in the games goes into strict training. I can remember, and I can tell you this, as an athlete and as a coach, if I went into a game and I wasn't confident that I was able to win, I could always point to one of two things. I knew I didn't do what was necessary to prepare, either physically, mentally, or both. When I was prepared, I was confident. I look at everything that we do as athletes and coach, and I can remember even in my own training, and as I look at my kids today, they have all the resources necessary to prepare you. I used to get up at 5 a.m. and we would have morning workouts. We would lift weights, we would condition, we would then go straight into our classes, and twice in between classes we would have 45-minute individual skill workouts so that we could hone our skills and get better at the things we were weak on. Then later in the afternoon after class we would go play for 2.5 hours competing against one another. Then we would go to the training table, which was meals, nutrition that they had set up for us to help our bodies achieve the maximum optimal performance levels. And then we'd have study hall right after that. Everything was scripted out such that we would address all weaknesses we had so that we could optimize our performance. And we have to do that. We have to do that in our spiritual lives. So how do we prepare? How do you prepare spiritually? We know what we do in our personal lives to improve our physical fitness or maybe even your spiritual fitness. What do? There are 4 things that I think you have to do when you're preparing in this race and while you're in the race. And number one is you have to recognize that the enemy is real, he's powerful, and you better know your opponent. In 1 Peter 5:8, it says, "Be alert and of sober mind. Your enemy, the devil, prowls around like a roaring lion looking for someone to devour." An often heard phrase in athletics is respect your opponent, but do not fear them. Respect all, but fear none. And I really disagree with that. I believe you have to have a healthy level of respect and fear of your opponent so that you can understand how they recognize your weaknesses to use against you. And the same is true for you. When you are prepared and you know your opponent, you understand how to exploit their weaknesses. It actually reminds me of a story, and I'll try to be brief, like I said here. But in preparation, when I was coaching basketball at Pittsburgh State University, we were in the middle of a season where we were playing outstanding. We were approaching the midpoint of the season. We were undefeated. We were in San Antonio, Texas. We were ranked in the top 15 in the country. We were getting ready to play another top 10 team in the country. We had one individual player who was great. He was an All-American. He was unbelievable. And then they had really good, solid players surrounding him. And we were approaching this, and to prepare, what we used to do is we used to put together very, very detailed scouting reports. And I'm talking handwritten, 12-page every single game, identifying what every player on the team shot from every position, or what they shot from 2-point, from 3-point, what they shot from the free throw line, what their tendencies were. Did he like to go right? Did he like to go left? Could he knock down shots off the dribble? Was he spot-up shooter? All that great stuff. Detailed explanation of everything with stats to back it up. Every play, every set play they ran, drawn out, all ready for our players to receive. And then we would also put together scout tapes. And now this is back in, and I know there's people in the room that remember what VCRs are. And this is back when we used to have all these game tapes. So I'd have about 10 game tapes. I'd review these game tapes, and I would have that VCR. I'd put the tape in the VCR, and I'd look, all right, here's a tendency, or here's a play that I want to make sure our team is aware of. I got to look at the counter clock on that VCR to find out where on that tape I got to fast forward or rewind to, and I got to write it down. All right? So I'm in a hotel room in San Antonio getting ready to prepare the night before. We're going to go through our scouting report that night, again in the morning, play the team the next day. I'm in there. I've got 2 VCRs set up in my TV. I've already done all this pre-work, watched about 7 or 8 games, have all my plays and lists and where to find them on the tapes lined out already. And I start, I've got my master tape. It's blank in the VCR underneath. I hit record, and I press play on the VCR above it, and it's recording what I have. You're all with me now? So, sometimes I got to describe how technology works. So, that being said, I got to about 2.5 hours of work. Got it all done, tape in and out, all this, and I grabbed the tape out of the bottom, put it in the top VCR. Here are my scout tapes all ready to go. I'm going to make sure it's queued up for the morning. Press play. Fuzz. I was a little irritated. I called our graduate assistant who had set up everything. That was his role when we got where we were going. He set everything up. And I was like, what's going on? He's like, I don't know. I set everything up. It's fine. All right. I look on the back of the VCR and the one wire that connects the two to make sure the input and the output are going where they need to go is not plugged in. At that moment, I already had my scouting report done. I was pretty confident about what we were going to do and who we were going to play, but I wasn't supremely confident. I was still in doubt. They had this amazing player, and literally this team's offense was they put him down on one side of the basketball court on the block, and they threw him the ball, and the other 4 guys circled around the 3-point line, and they waited. There was no offense. They waited. When he got the ball, they waited to see, what are you going to do? You going to try to guard me one-on-one? This guy averaged 25 points a game. If you don't guard him one-on-one, who are you going to come off of? Every single guy standing outside the three-point line shot above 40% from three, which is a very, very good percentage in basketball. So you had to decide how you were going to guard them. And I'm sitting there thinking, well, I've got my scouting report. I know I watched this, but I'm not supremely confident. And I almost stopped. I felt like that's good enough. But I didn't. I was like, no, I need to make sure I'm prepared. I need to make sure our team's prepared. So I sat back down and I did it again. First thing I did was make sure it was connected. Did it again. And while I did that, I actually started to know my opponent better. And I became supremely confident in how we were actually going to approach our game plan. Now, I didn't know if it was going to work, but what I did know is what I saw made me believe that this would work well for us. And long story short, we actually ended up winning the game. Probably had a lot to do with luck as well. And what the point of that is telling, what I'm trying to get to there is when we prepare, sometimes we prepare and then we get in these stagnant places where we feel like it's good enough and we stop. And what that did for me was make me realize I can't stop. I have to continue to press on and dive in to what I know will allow me to know my opponent. If you don't know your opponent, and especially in this life, in this battle we are fighting spiritually, the devil is powerful. And if you do not respect and fear that power, you will be no match for his tactics. Same's true spiritually. We have to recognize the power and the cunning of the devil. He's a master manipulator. He's a master of lies with a design to keep you from getting in the game. He creates doubt, and the doubt definitely comes from the devil. And if he can't make you doubt, he'll make you busy. He will do whatever he can to occupy your time, to pull you out of the race and keep you from pursuing Jesus and the truth. And the truth, because when you know your opponent, you know his weakness is the truth. When we know our opponent, then we have to take an honest inventory. So when we get in the game and then we prepare, we have to prepare in such a way that we know our opponent. And to do that, you have to take an honest inventory about what's actually hindering you from getting in the game. And that's the hard part about being a person of faith. You have to look at all the flaws that you have, address them. You have to take an honest inventory. In Hebrews 12:1, it says, "Let us throw off everything that hinders and the sin that so easily entangles." We have to evaluate ourselves. You know, as a player and as a coach, I just told you about all the film we watched. We would watch so much film. We would study our diets. We would study the areas we were weak so we could identify those weaknesses. The only way you do that in your spiritual life is simply to take an honest inventory of where you are. I have to look at what decisions I'm making that are leading to the results I'm getting, and then I have to understand, why am I unwilling to address them? In Galatians 5:7, it says, "You were running a good race. Who cut in on you to keep you from obeying the truth?" Most of the time, it's us. It's the devil getting a foothold in our lives. It's the devil creating doubt. And so we start to question. I don't know what it is for you today. Maybe it is, maybe it's that you feel like what you've done is too great. Your sin is too much. Maybe you feel it's going to interrupt your life, so you don't want to get in the race. Maybe you feel like you don't deserve it. You've done things wrong. You've sinned. You're not worthy. What you've done can't be forgiven. It can't be redeemed. Those ideas don't come from the Lord. Trust me, I know. In my personal story, I can tell you right now, in 2009, I'd found myself finally finished my playing career, had gotten into a coaching career, and I had found a way to put all the wrong things first. All the value I had, my identity, everything was wrapped up in who I was as a basketball player, basketball coach, and how maybe things didn't work out the way I thought they should. And it led me down a path that spiraled me into, and I'll save you the gory details, but in 2009 I made decisions that I was going to change jobs because money was the answer. Time at home was the answer. But the reality was this: I had begun drinking many, many years before that. And in 2009, it came to a head where that addiction put me in a place that I had no way out. I'd finally reached a place where what I deserved was death. If I had received justice, that's where I'd be. I would have lost everything. But what I received instead was grace. And I can tell you without going into gory details, the mess that was. I can remember the guilt I felt for what I knew I was doing wrong and the shame I felt for knowing that I wasn't who I was supposed to be. The shame was, I feared, what if people really knew who I was? I would put on a facade. I was checking the box. I was going to church. I might even speak here or there. But I wasn't really in the race. And I was scared to death of what if everybody knew who I really was. And all the while, I have God screaming at me, get in the game. I have God screaming at me, pursuing me. And I wouldn't hear it because I allowed the devil to get a foothold. You know, we feel guilt for what we do. We feel shame for what we are. Like I said, I felt guilty because I was doing something wrong, but I felt shame because I was something wrong, and that's how the devil was winning in my life. He used my depression, my addiction to alcohol. He made me believe I had to do it on my own, and he made me believe I could solve a spiritual need with a physical thing. Insert whatever physical thing you want there. You cannot meet a spiritual need with a physical response. He was winning. I believed I was going to do it on my own. He made me believe that my sin was greater than God's power to restore me, and that is a lie. You cannot do it on your own, and that is the opposite of the gospel. So when we look at preparing, we have to know our opponent. We have to understand and take a personal inventory of what is hindering us from getting in the game. The third thing we do to prepare is we have to shed the added weight of sin by confessing and submitting to God's authority in our lives. You know, my redemptive story is very simple. I didn't have an epiphany moment where God just convicted me. My life, the walls started closing in around me. I had nowhere else to go, and I finally reached a place. And this is what is amazing about God and His grace and the way He works in your life. He is doing things to you, and you look at Him and you question why. Why is this happening to me? And the whole reason why is He's simply moving you to where He needs you to be so He can finally do the work in you that He needs to do. And He moved me to a place where my walls were closing in. I was about to be exposed. And I finally sat down with my father. I sat down with my wife, and I told them, this is what's going on. I shed that sin. As an athlete, I spent so much time shedding weight, getting in shape, sacrificing all the things that I knew would keep me from that optimal performance. It's exactly the same thing. It was amazing when I did that. When I shed all that weight, got in shape, worked on my skills, it's amazing how much better I felt and how much better I performed. And the same is true spiritually. When I shed that weight by submitting to God's authority in my life and repented and came clean, the weight that came off, it didn't mean life got easy. It didn't mean it all went away, but I was finally free to recognize the sin, allow truth in, and push the devil away. When you cut out the junk, you repent, and I dove into the truth. It was amazing how I felt and I performed spiritually. So when you're preparing, you have to understand and know your opponent. You have to take an honest inventory of what's hindering you from getting in the game. And then you have to shed that sin. Get rid of the junk. And the last thing you have to do while you prepare is you have to understand we're not alone. In Hebrews 12:1, therefore, since we are surrounded by such a great cloud of witnesses, it says, remember those who are pulling for you. Remember those who are pulling for you. What a difference fans can make. You know, oftentimes when you go and you are in an arena. I played in arenas that had many, many different individuals, and I'm getting close, but probably not just yet. Sorry, I don't want to throw everything off here. Look at that. As you can tell, I'm not a speaker every week. I already gave the cue without meaning to give the cue. But anyway, I'll jump back in really quickly. I played in arenas with 40,000 people in it, and there are arenas that it is amazing. If you've ever been to a game, a professional sporting event, I can only tell you, when you are down on that floor, on that field, and you make a bucket and everybody erupts. I'm telling you, I get goosebumps right now because I feel like I can lift the entire building because I know I'm not alone. Like I've got this power behind me. The same is true when you're in athletics. Everybody has been involved at some level in athletics where you look at the reaction of a teammate or a coach when something good or bad happens, and that reaction determines how you are going to feel. You are not alone. You got to look for the people in your life that God has placed there, because you're not intended to walk this journey, run this race, play this game alone. I did not get rescued by Jesus because in an epiphany, He used the people in my life to show me who He was. When I was at my lowest point and I had to come clean, it was unbelievable the unconditional love I saw through my wife, through my parents. There was nothing I could do to make them love me less. They were disappointed. They were hurt. But I saw Jesus in them. I saw them love me despite the worst things about me and accept me and tell me, it's okay, son. You're forgiven. You see, the hard part about this spiritual life to understand is the hardest part has already been paid. He did it. He died. It's a gift for us. Amen.
Yes, amen.
I can tell you that you have to lean in to the people that God's put in your life. And that's what the church is. That's what the church is supposed to be. Finding people at their worst with your arms open wide, not condoning the sin, but loving them through it. When you prepare for the race, spiritually, it allows you to perform when we are hopeless, we are tested, we doubt, we are persecuted. So we have to, one, we have to recognize our enemy and know our opponent. Two, the second key to running a race for His reward is to prepare. We spent a lot of time on number 2. I'm going to get through 3 and 4 here real quick. The third thing we have to do is understand that we have to fix our eyes on the prize. The prize is Jesus. If you want to run a race for His reward, you better have your eyes fixed on the prize. In verse 25, Paul goes on in Corinthians to tell us, they do it to get a crown that will not last, but we do it to get a crown that will last forever. All the things we do athletically to try to prepare ourselves, we sacrifice just for a chance at the prize. We're always preparing for it. And in coaching, I often use this. And if you've ever read the book, 7 Habits of Highly Successful People by Stephen Covey, one of his habits simply says this: begin with the end in mind. Beginning with the end in mind. And what a great way to view your faith. We have to determine our priorities based on what the finish line is, not what's happening right now. We have to determine priorities based on truth of temporary versus eternal, and which one is actually worth it. So let me tell you what the prize isn't. The devil in my life made me believe the prize was all these things, and the prize is not pride, glory, fame, acceptance, money, sex, drugs, value, identity, power. Those are all temporary things. Those are not the prize. They are the lies that the devil uses to keep your eyes off the prize. Let me tell you what the prize is. It's Jesus. It's eternal life. It's freedom, grace, love, redemption, restoration. All those things come with the prize. In 1 Timothy 4, 7, and 8, it says, "Have nothing to do with godless myths and old wives' tales. Rather, train yourself to be godly. For physical training is of some value, but godliness has value for all things, holding promise for both the present life and the life to come. Earthly pursuits will fade. Eternal pursuits are what matter." It doesn't mean it'll always be easy, but it will be worth it. Remember what the prize is, and the prize is forever. Keep your eyes on Jesus, the prize. The last thing we have to do if we're going to run a race for His reward is we better finish, and we better finish with grit. You know, I prided myself as a player. I may not have been gifted in a lot of areas, but one area that I hold a lot of pride in was I was tough, and I had some grit. You know, on my teams, we used to have a grit drill, and you see a variation of this in a lot of different teams, different places. But we had this grit drill, and it was a full court drill. It was one person involved in the drill at a time, and we'd start on one baseline, we'd roll a ball out, and you had to run, and you had to dive on it. And when you dove on it, you had to roll over and find a coach at half court, pass it to, get up. You ran to that coach. You had to break down like you were playing defense, and you stood there, and that coach hit you in the chest, and you fell down, took the charge, and then the coach threw the ball out ahead of you towards the basket on the other end. You had to get up. You had to run where there was another coach, or maybe two, with pads, ready to beat the tar out of you while you were trying to score a basket. And then when you scored the basket, they threw the basketball all the way back to the other end. You had to sprint. You had to dive. You had to grab it, all while your teammates on the other end, when you finally dove on that loose ball, were there to hope and pull you up. We called it the grit drill because all those things were little things that are really easy to do and really easy not to do. But when we looked at them, we realized that those little things, when they added up to the result we wanted, the prize at the end, we realized there were no little things. And we prided ourselves on that toughness. We prided ourselves on that grit. Let me tell you, that toughness is hard to sustain. That perseverance that is required in your faith is vital. It is important to finish well to receive the reward, especially in a world that is consistently losing heart. Hebrews 12:1 says it like this, "And let us run with perseverance the race marked out for us, fixing our eyes on Jesus, the pioneer and perfecter of faith. For the joy set before Him, He endured the cross, scorning its shame, and sat down at the right hand of the throne of God. Consider Him who endured such opposition from sinners, so that you will not grow weary and lose heart." Sometimes we grow weary, we become stagnant, we become complacent, and we think, my faith is good enough. We stop fixing our eyes on Jesus, and when we think we're doing good enough, that's the moment the devil gets a foothold. And he enters your life. I think I'm good enough, and I stop pursuing. This keeps us from finishing the race. So you have to have grit. Grit means we don't quit. Grit means we don't cheat. No shortcuts. 2 Timothy 2:5 says, "Similarly, anyone who competes as an athlete does not receive the victor's crown except by competing according to the rules." Don't cheat. Don't cheat yourself. If you're doing what I did and you were simply checking a box, creating a facade, trust me, you were cheating your wife, your family, you're cheating and already failing everyone. Don't cheat. There's too much at stake. In verse 26, in verse 26, Paul wraps it up very eloquently. He says, "Therefore I do not run like someone running aimlessly. I do not fight like a boxer beating the air. No, I strike a blow to my body and I make it my slave, so that after I have preached to others, I myself will not be disqualified for the prize." Don't cheat yourself. Don't disqualify yourself from the prize because you allow doubt, shame, guilt. You allow self to tell you and the devil to tell you your sin is greater than God's power to restore you. Finish with grit means we compete. Chad Ragsdale recently wrote a book called Holy Grit. And he puts it like this: holy grit is a matter of both running with resilience and standing without being moved. The person of grit runs with resilience, not letting frustrations, heartbreaks, and temporary setbacks get in the way of reaching that which is of the ultimate importance. Finish with grit means we compete to win. Good enough is not good enough. We compete, we give our best, nothing less, nothing else. We keep pressing forward. In Philippians 3:12 through 14. Not that I have already obtained all this or have already arrived at my goal, but I press on and take hold of that which Christ Jesus took hold of me. Brothers and sisters, I do not consider myself yet to have taken hold of it. But one thing I do, forgetting what is behind and straining towards what is ahead, I press on towards the goal to win the prize for which God has called me heavenward in Christ Jesus. I'm so thankful in my life that the parallels through athletic performance, the parallels between what I've done athletically finally spoke to me. God spoke to me through those to move me spiritually. I'm not the man I'm going to be. Maybe I'm not the man I ought to be. But because of the grace of Jesus, thank God I'm not the man I used to be. I want to tell you this in closing. Jesus gives us the new life, and Jesus enables us to live it for His glory. I'm going to run the race for His reward by standing firm and saying yes and getting in the game. I'm prepared by God's grace, setting me free from my past and not letting me pull away. I keep straining forward with my eyes on the prize, Jesus, so I can finish the race and receive His reward. I challenge you today, church, run to Jesus for new life and run for Jesus your whole life.